A single bus accident changed Ting Cow Village forever. What was once an ordinary hillside community became a place even the police hesitated to enter after dark. Villagers kept hearing cries in the valley. "Help me, it hurts," echoing night after night, as if the voices had never stopped. Talismans went up, rituals were performed, but the stories never faded. And those who lived through it all say the same thing. There was something there. At 3 in the morning, Ting Cow Village was so silent that even the wind could be heard clearly. Half awake, Uncle Hoy got up to use the bathroom, but as he reached the doorway, he suddenly froze. Outside, a few piercing cries echoed through the darkness. "It hurts, help me." The voices were mixed between men and women, and they sounded so close it was as if they were coming from just beneath his eaves. He stood there stunned, instinctively thinking someone might have fallen down the slope. But no one had dared to walk this mountain path at night for over a decade, so why would there suddenly be a group of people crying for help now? A heavy chill crept into his chest. He didn't dare open the door immediately. He could only stand stiffly in place, listening as the voices drifted near and far, broken and wavering, like people trapped somewhere, screaming through unbearable pain. Eventually, he couldn't stand it anymore. He slowly opened the front door and looked up. The entire hillside was filled with figures. Crowded, motionless silhouettes, some standing upright, some hunched over, some lying flat on the ground without a single twitch. Under the faint moonlight, their outlines were disturbingly clear, yet not one of them was a villager. Uncle Hoy's legs went weak. He nearly collapsed onto the floor. He stumbled back inside, slammed the door, locked it tight, and hid beneath his blanket, shaking so badly he couldn't sleep a single minute. Deep down, he knew whatever he saw out there were not people, and certainly not the living. When he finally managed to call the police, his voice was still trembling. You need to come up here and look. Outside my house." A few days before Uncle Hoy's terrifying encounter, a catastrophic bus accident had shaken all of Hong Kong. On a July morning in 2003, the first bus of the day, packed with passengers, was traveling along Tuen Mun Road toward Tin Shui Wai. It was supposed to be an ordinary weekday rush hour, nothing more. But a sudden lane change by a container truck shattered that normality in an instant. The bus was struck so hard it lost control. Its rear bumper was torn clean off, and the entire vehicle slammed violently into the guardrail of the elevated highway. Half of the double-decker hung over the edge, suspended in midair for only a few seconds before it plunged straight down more than 30 meters into the hillside below. The impact was so loud the entire village heard it. When residents rushed out, many later said the scene looked like a plane crash. Debris scattered across the slope, passengers thrown from the vehicle, screams and cries of pain echoing everywhere. By the end of the rescue operation, 21 people had lost their lives, including students, teachers, and commuters on their way to work. And just a few days after the tragedy, the very first person to call the police was none other than Uncle Hoy, who lived closest to the hillside. The desperate voices he heard in the middle of the night came from the exact same place where the bus had fallen. After the accident, Ting Cow Village began to feel unnaturally quiet. Things still seemed normal during the day, but once night fell, the entire village felt as if it had slipped into another world. Villagers said they often heard footsteps slowly passing outside their homes, or glimpsed dark shapes brushing past their windows. Sometimes there were low, muffled groans, sounds of someone in such pain that they couldn't even form a full sentence. People called the police, and officers came up to investigate, but every time they searched the area, they found nothing. All they felt was an abnormal chill along the mountain path, and a silence so heavy that even breathing sounded like it might disturb something unseen. Both the bus company and a local Taoist temple performed rituals, burning incense, putting up talismans, hoping to guide the dead to peace. But the efforts seemed to have little to no effect. If anything, the strange occurrences grew even more frequent at night. Villagers stopped going out after dark, and their doors and windows were covered with talismans, layer upon layer, until entire walls were plastered with them like makeshift altars. Some became so frightened that they moved away entirely, saying they would rather abandon their homes than spend another night there. A few days after the crash, police received a report that a suspicious child had been seen near a construction site close to Ting Khao village. Because the site was built along uneven terrain and bordered the hillside, any child wandering inside would be in serious danger. Officers headed up the mountain once again to investigate. Along the way, nearly every house was empty. Most villagers had already moved out. The remaining homes were dimly lit, scattered across the slopes, and the air carried a heavy stillness that was difficult to describe. Those few villagers who stayed said they often noticed unfamiliar figures wandering around the village at night, which was why no one dared to step outside after dark. The construction site itself was eerily quiet. All the workers had left early. Only the security guard remained. He told the officers that recently, workers had repeatedly seen a child carrying a school backpack in different parts of the site, sometimes standing beside piles of building materials, and the next moment appearing at the edge of an unfinished upper floor. Whenever anyone tried to approach, the figure would vanish around a corner as if it had never been there. These sightings happened on different days, yet the descriptions were strikingly consistent. The security guard also mentioned hearing crying at night, soft, pained wails, as though someone injured was sobbing in the darkness. But whenever he checked, the entire site was empty, the lights revealing nothing but cold metal scaffolding and bare concrete. The strange occurrences unsettled the workers so much that they eventually insisted on leaving before nightfall every day. Police conducted a thorough search of the entire site, but could not find a single trace, not even a shadow. The silence felt unnatural, as if the whole area had been drained of sound, leaving only a suffocating weight pressing against their chests. With nothing more they could do, the officers recorded the incident and continued their observation. Just before leaving the construction site, one of the officers suddenly realized his handcuffs were missing. To avoid losing official equipment, he and a small team returned to search again. The night had grown thick and heavy, and the site was lit only by a few dim yellow lamps. Shadows from the metal scaffolding swayed on the ground as if something unseen was weighing them down. The officers split up to look for the missing item. As one of them passed a pile of cement bags, the beam of his flashlight swept across a small figure. He froze. Standing in the shadow behind the pile was a child with a school backpack, unnaturally still, as if he were part of the darkness itself. The officer called out cautiously, "Hey, kid?" The child didn't respond. He didn't move either. He simply stepped forward, just enough for the light to reveal half of his body. In that instant, the officer felt the temperature drop sharply. The air around him seemed sucked dry, and the cold didn't come from outside. It seeped directly against his skin, as if rising from within the ground. He wrapped his arms around himself and took a half step back, breath quickening. Under his breath he muttered, "Why is it so cold?" This wasn't night wind. It was a cold that touched the soul. Hearing the commotion, the other officers rushed over, sweeping their flashlights across the cement pile. But where the figure had been standing, there was now nothing, only dust and the long shadows of the scaffolding. No footprints, no sign of movement. The child had vanished without a trace, as if pulled out of reality in an instant. The only thing left on the ground was the missing handcuffs, placed neatly on top of the cement dust. The metal edges caught the faint construction lights, looking unnaturally clean, as though someone had gently set them down rather than dropped them. There were no impact marks, no scuffs, nothing that suggested a fall or natural movement. The officers stood in silence. Under the crossing beams of their flashlights, the handcuffs seemed like the only living object in the entire site, resting quietly, as if reminding them that something had truly been there. Something that no longer wished to be seen. A heavy unease settled over the group. No one said it aloud, but every officer felt the same instinct tightening in their chest. It was time to leave. They gathered their gear with quick, tense movements, eager to get out of the construction site before anything else decided to appear. As they left the construction site, The night fog had grown unnaturally thick, like a heavy blanket pressing down over the entire mountain road. When the officers reached the fork near the village entrance, they stopped. In the white haze, the three paths looked almost identical, and their flashlights lit only a few steps ahead. They debated whether to turn back, but the fog kept thickening, blurring their vision and slowly chipping away at their sense of direction. Just then, footsteps echoed from the slope above. A middle-aged man emerged from the fog, walking toward them at a steady pace. His expression was calm, unaffected by the dense mist. Dressed in simple work clothes, shoulders slightly slumped, he looked just like an ordinary man heading home after a long day. Out of courtesy, the team leader asked, "Sir, which way do we take to get out of the village?" The man didn't hesitate. He glanced at the three paths, then pointed to one of them with a neutral tone. "Take this one. You'll get out. It's the road you used earlier." Relieved, the officers prepared to leave. As they turned, the team leader casually added, "Are you a villager here?" The man shook his head. "No, just passing through on my way to work." With that, he turned and walked into a different direction, disappearing into the fog within seconds. The mist swallowed him completely. No fading footsteps, no shadow, nothing. The group walked in silence for a while until one officer suddenly stopped and whispered, "Wait, how did he know which road we came in from?" The others froze. Another officer slowly added, "And who goes to work by passing through Tingkao village at this hour?" No one said another word, but they all realized the same thing at the same moment. The man they had just met could not have been there. After the police completed their operations that night, Tingkao village sank back into silence. The wreckage on the hillside had long been cleared, yet nearby residents continued to claim that, late at night, faint and untraceable sounds could still be heard, sometimes like wind, sometimes like human voices drifting along both sides of the village paths. Out of fear, villagers kept talismans on their doors and windows year-round, and even police officers avoided lingering in the area after dark during their patrols. Even after the tragedy faded from headlines, someone would still occasionally leave a bouquet of flowers on the hillside. No one knew who placed them there, and no one wished to find out. Yet every now and then, when someone walked past, they couldn't help but glance down the slope. The place where a fully loaded bus once fell. And where, some say, in the quietest hours of the night, soft cries for help can still be heard in the darkness.